Hi. Recently, I sat down and recorded Benjamin Britten's first suite for solo cello. Now, I realize this piece and Britten himself may or may not be familiar to you, so instead of just throwing my recording out onto the internet with no explanation, I thought I would make this little introduction video. If you would rather not hear this listener's guide and you'd rather just hear the recording, you can find the link for that in the description to this video. Or, if you would like to explore the piece movement by movement and hear the recording side by side with my little introduction, you can find the links to each of those in the description as well. Now, if you're thinking that you don't think you know Benjamin Britten's music, you might be wrong if you've seen Wes Anderson's film Moonrise Kingdom, one of my favorite movies. The soundtrack is filled with Benjamin Britten. Or, even if you haven't seen Moonrise Kingdom, you may have heard his perhaps most well-known piece, A Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra. It features a narrator who walks you through the various sections of the orchestra. This piece actually is also featured prominently in Moonrise Kingdom.
In order to show you how a big symphony orchestra is put together, Benjamin Britten has written a big piece of music, which is made up of smaller pieces that show you all the separate parts of the orchestra.
Benjamin Britten was a British composer. He was alive from 1913 to 1976. He composed music for all different types of ensembles, solo works, chamber works, and even giant works for choir and orchestra. Here's how I introduced his first suite for solo cello when I performed it recently. So he also wrote 3 solo suites for cello, thankfully. Thanks, Britten. When you hear cello suite, you might think of the Bach cello suites, there's 6 of them. They're all equally great and have become real standards for the cello. And he was definitely inspired by Bach's writing in many ways, structure, even just the form of a suite, and even some music nerdy things. If you want to talk to me afterwards, so you can see it. You can see some of that in his writing. So you have in your hands perhaps a map to this piece, the program. Yes? So let's I'm going to guide you through this map, okay, so you don't get totally bewildered in this piece. You'll notice there's kind of a pattern in the movements, right? I've put the translations in case you don't speak Italian. So there's a chant, there's 2 movements, there's a chant, there's 2 movements, there's a chant, and there's 2 movements with the last chant tacked onto the end of the last movement. We're good so far? Okay, so that's the roadmap. So these chants kind of are the unifying thread of this suite. All right, so he keeps coming back to this chant element. So let me just give you a couple sparks of imagination as we go. This suite is just a collection of movements, right? And how I think of this one is, has anyone read The Magician's Nephew by C.S. Lewis? Yes. It's great. It's the first book of the Narnia series. And in this book, the main character ends up in this kind of land between the worlds, this woods, and there's a series of pools, and each pool leads to a different world. Some of them seem familiar, some of them are really strange, some of them are dying, some of them haven't even been created yet. So the suite is kind of like that, all right? Stay with me. The chants, the 4 chants, that's the woods, okay? We keep coming back to the woods, and we keep jumping into different pools, which lead to different worlds, okay? But each time we come back out of a pool, back to the woods are different. They're still woods, but they're not like we left them until maybe the end, okay? All right, so that's kind of an analogy that helps my brain. All right, so we start with the first chant, and it's not maybe a chant that you're thinking of. You're thinking very solemn Gregorian chant. This is bright and brilliant and kind of wild and fantastic, as if you were stepping out into Narnia for the first time. Following this is a fugue. This is one of the Bach references. Bach loved writing fugues. And you'll hear maybe some similarities. There's a single voice that enters with an idea, and then some more voices enter, kind of copying that idea, and then changing that idea, and then the whole polyphony builds in complexity. And then in the middle of this, as it gets more complex, there comes a river. There's a river kind of flowing and churning through the rest of that fugue. The lament is just like it sounds. It's the lament. And this is really like the raw emotional side of this suite. So the fugue is a little bit quirky, and the lament really brings it home. The Canto Secondo, the second chant, is like at the tail end of the lament, so you might not even be aware that we're there. And this is like a distant memory of this first brilliant chant. It's exhausted and kind of just distant. The serenade is also kind of like it sounds. It's a serenade, except maybe with guitar and maybe a mischievous guitar player. You can interpret as you will. The march is also like it sounds. It's a march, and you'll hear from the very start a battle call in the distance, answered by drums, answered by a horn, and gradually the 2 armies get closer and closer until they battle, and then they retreat in the distance. At the very end, you'll hear kind of his own version of taps played at the end of the movement. The trumpet. Keep in mind, all of these movements are really connected, so it kind of feels like one big journey. There's not a lot of big breaks. The third chant is where things get kind of dark, maybe even darker than the lament. So we're back in the woods, but it's really dark, it's murky, it's foggy. It kind of feels like the very first chant, but inverted and upside down and messed up. Very, very lost. This slowly transforms into a single note, which is this note, which is our drone for the next movement. Okay? So this drone just continues as all these strange creatures call back and forth in the darkness, and then out of nowhere, very distantly, very strange kind of hypnotic melody, discernible melody kind of drifts through the darkness. The darkness lifts temporarily, and there's a bee. Okay, there's a bee, and there's 3 bees, and then quickly there's maybe like 27 bees, and then we're like in a swarm of bees. And the swarm is kind of zooming around. We're stuck in this swarm of bees, and then like a streak of sunlight through the swarm comes back in the very, very first chant, bringing sunlight. And then I'll leave the end to you. You can interpret the end how you will, what happens with the bees and the light. Okay, so those are just ideas. Don't worry about keeping track of where we are. Just enjoy the ride.